Good evening, everyone. As Dr. Tiwari mentioned, I am a trained economist, and I'm not one that promotes any political agenda, and I simply deal with the economic data that is before me and analyze that against my economic theoretical background. And I think one of the sayings that I generally use in my thought process is that what you are speaks so loud that no one can hear what you say. In other words, people say actions speak louder than words. For me, the data is what I use. I don't listen to what people are saying, but I go through the data for myself. And so everything that you hear me talk about is something that I would have found in terms of a report that was written by either the IDB, the IMF, or the central bank, or data coming out of the central bank or the Central Statistical Office, or data coming from the World Bank Development Indicators. So those are generally my sources. So I'll start a little bit with a report that was written by IDB and released, I think it was in October last year, 2017. And the report had a very pointed statement in there. And it was a quarterly bulletin in 2017. Again, it was released in October of 2017. And it said that the economy of Trinidad and Tobago has been in a recession since 2015 with a projected growth of 0%. And that while natural gas will recover in 2017-18 on the back of new fields and global oil prices that are projected to stabilize if forecasts are subject to a great uncertainty. Well, they projected a growth of 0%, but what actually happened is that we have contracted by, in some instances, 1.2%, 1.5%, hovering around the 2% mark. So there's been a general contraction, overall contraction for 2017 of 1.2% is the figure that was settled on. We still have significant challenges in terms of the foreign exchange issue. As a matter of fact, from from December 2017, now we started off in 2015 with an import cover of about 12 months import cover. In other words, we can cover the imports, right, up to 12 months. We slipped on that, and then in December 2017, we went down to 9.7 months import cover. And from December 2017 to June 2018, we slipped now to 8.6 months import cover. So the import cover, the foreign reserves are being eroded as we speak, and at a relatively accelerated pace in my opinion. In other words, we don't have much set aside if anything catastrophic should happen in terms of the import cover. We are at the mercies of whatever agencies are out there. Now, we have other challenges where that is concerned. Now, I'll just point you to some of the general figures that I pulled out from the central bank bulletin. And one of them that is worrying me is that unemployment from March 2017 to June 2017 went from 4.5% to 5.3%. So we're seeing unemployment on the rise. That points to a significant problem. We have inflation, which moved from 2.4% to 0.8%. So something is stalling in the economy, right? Something is not happening that should be happening. Somebody mentioned the current account balances. I think the gentleman there mentioned current account balances. Well, we are in deficit. Current account balances, negative 1.7 billion TT dollars. That's our position. In other words, we're importing more than we're exporting. How can we fund that is the question. Now, added to that, we have, what I do is I look at the economy as the energy sector, which is the oil and gas, and the non-energy sector, which is everything else. The energy sector recorded a small, well, it is not in deficit, let's put it that way. Now, the non-energy sector is recording a deficit of $2.3 billion. So the non-energy sector is failing. Traditionally, the non-energy sector has always run a deficit, but it is growing. And what is happening is that we do not have the luxury of the energy sector, which has happened in the past, to cover the deficit in the non-energy sector. So with energy sector revenues falling, we cannot cover the deficit in the non-energy sector. In other words, diversification is not happening. So we'll continue to see that. And I'll point you to some other macroeconomic figures. While I said the overall contraction was, don't worry, you have good news, eh? Because there's a way out of it, but it's a simple way, but I have not seen it happening. Now, when I looked at some other reports, there was an overall 1.2% contraction. Now, mind you, recall that the budget was presented with a theme of managing our fiscal space, changing the paradigm. So I always go back to that as a general reminder to myself that we ought to be seeing changes in the paradigm and how we manage our fiscal space, our business. Now, there's been an overall contraction in the economy of 1.2%, but I'll read to you some other contractions, declines. The construction sector declined by 6.9%. The manufacturing sector contracted by 3%. The distribution sector, the people who engage in distribution, that contracted by 5.8%. The agricultural sector contracted by 11.7%. This is coming out of the March 2018 Central Bank Summary of Economic Indicators. The retail sales contracted by 4.9%. So far, the overall contraction is 1.2%. So what we're seeing is that every sector in the economy outside of the energy sector is recording significant contractions. When we have the retail sales declining, we have a problem. It means that small businesses will begin to suffer, as well as large businesses. Profit margins will begin to suffer. Businesses make adjustments because they have one variable cost. The one variable cost that you can adjust when you see a decline in sales, the one variable you have to adjust is labor. So if you begin to see a contraction in retail sales, rest assured, following that will be an increase in unemployment in that sector. Because profit margins have to be maintained, and that's the one variable that you have. So those are some of the challenges that we face. Now, that's just some of the general economic data. That is the most recent one. That oftentimes we don't hear about these figures in public domain and public discussions because it is not something that is comfortable. But as an academic and an economist, I think it is important to acknowledge what is happening. You know, the first step in addressing any issue is acknowledging that we have a problem, rather than not acknowledge that we have a problem. So what I think is that before things get better, they will get worse. One is because we continue to engage, and I think someone mentioned it in the comments, without saying it in the technical way as Debbie mentioned, that what we are doing is pro-cyclical policy rather than counter-cyclical. And what does that mean? It means that when things are good, we reduce taxes and increase government spending. When things are bad, we increase taxes and reduce government spending. But that's what we're doing. And that is not the right approach. What does that mean? That approach to managing an economy guarantees failure. Because we have low fiscal buffers. Our debt to GDP ratio is 60%, which means most of our revenue goes towards servicing the interest on the debt. So we have some of those challenges. We have implemented measures. So far, there are a number of measures that were implemented. But what those measures, when those measures were implemented, the fiscal measures so far, they have had a significant impact, data-wise, on poor households. And we've seen a reduction in investment. So the individuals who are most affected are the lower income households. Most immediately affected are the lower income households. So that is our position right now. So we don't have revenues, we have a lot of debt to service, and we have contracting sectors within the economy. Now, some people may point to some of the other macro figures. Trinidad records and boasts of per capita GDP in the vicinity of 17,000 US. That is, our per capita GDP is 17,000 US per person. That's what it says, macro-wise. But when we look at how it is distributed, we have a problem. Unemployment, while climbing, and is 5.3% as I mentioned, that is still low, relatively low, because perfect scenario is 3%. So we only 2% off from the perfect scenario, which is 3% unemployment. But what that does not tell us is that the worst problem we have right now is youth unemployment, which ranges anywhere between 2% to 24%. I was reading another report today, youth male unemployment is in the region of 24%. So 24% of our youth are unemployed. That spells a different problem for us. And these individuals are individuals in most instances with first degrees from the University of the West Indies. Now, we started out talking about that. So the question now becomes, how do we, now, oh, there's another one. Someone mentioned it as well, the competitiveness index. We are not competitive, and we've not taken steps to become competitive by way of the other sectors, the non-energy sectors. So here is what, we have a global competitiveness index, which is released every year. Now, from 2012 to 2013, Trinidad ranked 92. And then in 2017, we ranked 83. Now, the lower the number, the better we are on competitiveness index, right? That's what we hear. But no one mentions the denominator. We ranked 92 out of 148 countries. In 2017, we ranked 83rd out of 137 countries. 11 countries were dropped from that index. So in absolute terms, there's no improvement in the Global Competitiveness Index. And the Global Competitiveness Index is broken down into different areas. And the areas that we have the most problems with in the Global Competitiveness Index, and I'll quote these areas for you: crime and theft, inefficient government bureaucracy, corruption, poor work ethic, and insufficient capacity to innovate. Now those are key areas, because if we're talking about diversification and we are ranking low on the ability and the capacity to innovate, we have another significant challenge. Now, we can achieve sustainable development. I didn't know how much time I have, but I will just go through with you that what I'm underscoring is not bad news. What I am highlighting are the uncomfortable facts as they exist in the economy, and to underscore the dire need for macro policies to make significant adjustments and for priorities to be given to certain areas. Now, the first thing that macro policies should look at would be, and this is not just for achieving economic growth, this is for us to be able to achieve sustainable economic growth, is that we have to minimize the impact of price volatility, which means that we have to focus on the innovation aspect, which would then build on that issue or begin to treat with the issue of the diversification. The second element that we need, or condition that we need for fiscal sustainability, is high quality physical infrastructure in the form of roads, power, water, ports, and communications infrastructure, and I say high quality. The third is high quality human capital. We have significant challenges with our education sector. We have the business sector requiring one set of skills and the education sector producing a completely different set of skills. So what happens is, instead of being able to fetch a high wage upon exiting the secondary school system or the university system, the company now has to spend quite a bit of money to train that person for the specific job, which means that the wage or the salary will be much lower. It will be pitched at a lower level. So whereas you could probably earn an income of 10,000 if you were trained with the requisite set of skills, then there is a mismatch. And again, that is coming out of research. So we need some flexibility. We also need to refocus on the provision of vocational education. We have drifted away from that, and we've gone into the formal university setting and have ignored the vocational sector in terms of the education provision. And that is something that is very important. So we need plumbers, we need carpenters, we need technicians. And those are the individuals that would be able to grow some small businesses if they have those particular skill sets. Think about when you call a plumber. or technician, the prices that they charge you. It's not cheap, right? Because there are few of them, so they charge a high price. It's all about demand supply. The other one is that we need investment for research in both public and private sectors, and then we need a very attractive local business environment. Now, someone mentioned the issue of property taxes, and I say to you that that is the better option than increasing corporate taxes. So I'll just refresh your memory about some of the fiscal measures that were introduced in the last budget that were supposed to be implemented to address certain issues. And those measures included, let me get it right, it included agricultural sector incentives. I wonder how incentives work because the agricultural sector has since contracted by 11.7%. So it's being disincentivized rather than incentivized. We're talking about housing construction incentives. Again, construction sector contracted by over 6%. Export allowances, tourism sector incentives. Those are just some of the fiscal measures that were proposed in the last budget. Other fiscal measures included increases in corporate taxes, which was something I thought from an economic perspective was very dangerous. Because you have a contracting non-energy sector, higher corporate taxes can only lead to further contractions for them. The removal or gradual removal of the fuel subsidy. And healthcare, there was a proposal for license fees for private hospitals. All of those were some of the proposals that were made. So where now do we begin to talk about this? Because corporate taxes are very distortive. They lead to more distortions than the property taxes. Now, it has to be administered in a very judicious way. That has been our ongoing challenge. We have these different policies that come out, but they're not implemented properly. So here are some of the things that we can do. And what I talk about is not just macroeconomic policies, it is something that we have not been doing, which is called fiscal consolidation. We have not been doing that. How does that work? Well, I kind of divided it into different areas, which would be the investment climate, dealing with the fiscal space, and then fiscal consolidation in terms of what to do with the labor market, and then some of the other things like taxes and all those different things that we talk about. Now, with the fiscal consolidation, it will allow us to create fiscal space to manage our affairs. Remind you that we have a 60% debt to GDP ratio. That is higher than, and the IDB, Inter-American Development Bank, indicated that, well, we actually have 61%. You know, as economists, we round up and round down. But this 1% is a dangerous 1%. That's 61%. Because anything above 60% means that any government expenditure, when the debt to GDP ratio is above 60%, any additional increases in expenditure leads to further contractions. So we need to be very, very careful because we are on the other end of that slope where we can go down very quickly. Things can spiral out of control. So how do we manage our fiscal space? Fiscal consolidation. Improving efficiencies. That is one thing we need to do, work on. Improving efficiencies in the public sector, the provision of public goods. It means that we need to do better in terms of the provision of those services. We need to undertake capital expenditure, and this has been my concern with some bonds floating around. There are bonds floating around, right? What we fail to realize is that when we purchase these bonds, we are actually purchasing debt. Right? We're taking part in that process where we're taking the government, we're holding debt. We're net debt holders. What is happening, and my concern is that when bonds are floated, they are supposed to be used for investment projects. In other words, we're supposed to invest that money so we can see a return on that investment. But we have been managing our affairs by simply meeting recurrent expenditures, and that is dangerous because we're not generating any revenue. We're simply doing what we do at home. You know we do it, I do it. This month, light bill due. So you put in that little call or you go up to the counter, how much before they cut it? How much do I have to pay? or you get a flow bill and you call Flow and you say, all right, what's the minimum I have to pay to avoid disconnection or interruption of service? You pay that amount and then hopefully things will get better next month, right? That is how we are managing the economy. Now, while the household could get away with it because we could go out and we could make a little hustle and make ends meet and things will turn around, we have a difference in terms of the economy. When we manage an economy like that, we need to generate the revenue to service the debt and to continue with the social programs, as well as to undertake other investment projects. So we need to be careful about the bonds being floated and what the money is being used for. And I hear people going blindly. If you buy shares in a company, the one thing you want to do is know what that company is doing and how they're performing. If we purchase bonds, we need to get a clear understanding as to what that money is going to be used for and how it will redound to the benefit moving forward. So we need to take into consideration that. Now, when we undertake capital expenditures, and I don't get into the foray of things that are happening, but we can spend a whole lot of money and purchase something. But if we don't factor in maintenance costs, which is part of fiscal consolidation, the item that we purchase, if we don't maintain that item, what happens in the very near future? And if you purchase an item that is not new, then things can go very bad very quickly. So we need to be mindful of that. We need to move away, part of the fiscal consolidation plan, move away from categorical spending to targeted programs. In other words, when we have social programs, the people who need it are the only ones who should receive the assistance. There are people in the system who are receiving social benefits and payouts and payments that don't really need these payments. One of them is GATE. Even though there were modifications to GATE, there have been no reductions in the amount of people accessing GATE. And the people accessing GATE are not the low-income earners. Because the low-income earners, even meeting the non-tuition expenses are challenging. So they tend to opt to work instead of going to school. So that is something that needs to be dealt with in terms of fiscal consolidation. All of our social programs need to be more targeted. Again, those individuals who need it, receive it. Those who don't need it, don't receive it. In the event that you move from the category of not needing it to needing it, then you should receive it. But it should not be everyone receiving it. We need to work on the subsidies that are being paid out, and we have to be very careful of that. And something people tend not to agree with me on is the issue of housing. Our problem is not housing in terms of the provision of housing. Our problem is the demand-supply issue. And what happens is that when the government engages in the provision of a private good, housing is a private good in an economic sense. It is not a public good like education. If housing units are being provided by the government at a subsidized cost, it makes it very, very difficult for the private sector to provide housing stock because it becomes very, very expensive. So you would find now low-income earners will receive the subsidized housing, but middle-income earners is a group that is left unaddressed, which is a large percentage of the population as well. It crowds out the private sector. The last study I did, which was published about 2 years ago, points to 70% of the people who demand housing will never be able to afford a housing unit, and most of them are in the middle income group. So we need to make sure that problem is treated with carefully. It's a very uncomfortable discussion, I know, but it's something that needs to be dealt with as well. We need to work on, and part of the investment climate is strengthening the business environment, realigning the output in the education sector with that of the business sector. And this is another one that never receives a favorable reception by anyone, is that I do believe, in terms of fiscal consolidation, is that public sector should move to performance-based pay. In other words, what you are paid is based on your performance, and the increases you receive should be based on performance, not how loud you can shout. and beat pan and burn tires. That is not how we go about dealing with pay increases in a civil society. In other words, if I am getting more money, it means that I am producing more. The other issue is the labor market. Now this is not a quick win. None of these are quick wins. And none of these are easy sells. That is why you don't hear about fiscal consolidation plans in the general political discussions, because none of it is comfortable to talk about. But I can talk about it. We need to work on reducing incentives for early retirement. If we spend upwards of $700 million on tertiary education, and then turn around and allow these individuals the ability to take early retirement, then what are we doing? Because in order to break even for one individual, that person, by way of the amount of taxes they pay, that one person has to pay taxes into the system actively for 35 years to break even in the provision of tertiary education. So we need to disincentivize early retirement and let people work until the retirement age. Again, nothing anybody wants to hear, because we all want early retirement with full benefits. That is not how the system works. Well, if I get it, I will take it, but anyway. No, I'm just joking. We also need to, right, we talked about the targeting. Now, we also, when we talk about the fiscal consolidation, it doesn't sound like much, but it's not something that is easy, and it's not something that can be done quickly. But if done, we can move from the current position to one that is fiscally sustainable. And we will see growth, not now, but if we implement some of these measures now, going forward, in about 10 years, 5-10 years, we will see significant changes in the system as we know it. Now, again, I pointed to the taxes, and we should move away from the corporate taxes and some of the consumption taxes, which can be burdensome, and look to the less distortive taxes. So we can keep with the immovable property as well as consumption taxes. But once we move into the realm of corporate taxes, we're talking about significant challenges. Now, fiscal consolidation, in every instance where it was done. Now, sometimes you may hear that we have a fiscal consolidation plan. Okay, we may have a semblance of a fiscal consolidation plan, but we have the worst possible scenario for a fiscal consolidation plan, which is increasing taxes, reducing expenditure by the government. Right? Although government spending has been reduced, we're not seeing improvements in efficiencies. My position is always, don't talk about what you need to cut. Talk about what you need to improve by way of efficiencies, and the cuts will naturally happen. So I worked in the private sector, in the banking sector. Our focus was never cutting spending. Our focus was always improving efficiencies. Whenever we improved efficiencies, we saved 10% in the expenditure side. So you work on improving efficiencies, customers walk away happier, and you are actually saving money in the process. So those are some of the things. Now, fiscal consolidation is best administered when an economic situation is bad, because it signals to individuals as well as foreign agencies that we are serious about managing the fiscal affairs of the country. Right now, we're not sure, I am not sure what is going on, because my data points stopped in 2016. I'm not sure what is happening in 2017 realistically from the data that is being used. I use data, as I said, from other agencies. And so 2017 story is still to be told, but the markings are already on the wall. That is not, the contraction so far is projected to be 1.2%. When the dust settles, I guarantee you it would be over 2% contraction. And this has been happening, as I said, from the IDB initially, since 2015. That is when we have seen contraction since. Now, there are a few other concerns that I have moving forward. I know, normally I tell people, yes, so we can solve the problem. But the steps to solve the problem and to address the issues, they are not being taken and taken seriously from an economic standpoint. And I am not going to get into some of the other issues that were raised. I made some little notes here. So I talked about the corruption. I talked about the low-income earners suffering. I talked about the current account balances. I do not want to speculate about where fuel prices would go. I do not have that type of information at my disposal. So I'm suffering from imperfect information where certain issues in the macro space are concerned. So I would defer on that one. So some of the other concerns that I have, which are moving forward, is the aging population. Nothing is being done to address that. The aging population is being reflected in enrollment at tertiary level institutions, meaning that the pool of individuals in the age cohort, let's say 19 to 35, is much, much smaller. We have a population with over age 35 is the larger percentage of the working population than this younger cohort. And that means that there's another issue that is looming in the back of my head, which is NIS. Because that is those individuals who are working are paying in and those individuals who are retired who receive those payments, right? What if those individuals working are not sufficient in terms of the contributions to pay out to those who are retiring? We have a problem. Now, there are two ways to fix that. One, increase the contributions of those who are working, or two, increase the retirement age. And I joke when I say that I don't think anybody anywhere in the world in the planning space expects anyone to live past much more 5 years after retirement. Because when the average lifespan was 57, the retirement age was 55. Now the lifespan of the average person is 75, so they raise the retirement age. So if the lifespan increases, they will raise the retirement age again. You see, that's my own view in terms of how it looks. And that's worldwide, that's not just in this. We have an issue with black markets. That's another major issue. There are a lot of issues that we don't talk about. For instance, we don't talk about child labor. We don't talk about it, we ignore it, but that's another issue that we have. Now, again, I pointed to a declining agricultural and manufacturing sector. How can we meaningfully talk about diversification if we have all of the sectors, in particular, the agricultural sector, declining by 11.6%? So we do not have food security, and now we do not have energy security. So we're moving away from one end of the spectrum to another end of the spectrum. We have low labor productivity. We have a lot of uncertainty in the system, and what happens with uncertainty is that it makes the contraction even faster. How does uncertainty work? I am not sure about my job 1 year from now, so every extra penny I make, I set it aside for the rainy day, instead of going out and spending it. You see, the economy grows when we spend. If we are seeing unemployment increasing, it means spending is falling. It means tax revenues are falling. It means the economy is going to contract even further. So we are the engines of growth when we spend. But if we're not spending, that growth is not happening. It's not taking place. So corporate sales will fall, which means corporate taxes will fall. Consumption sales, tax will fall. VAT receipts will fall because we're not buying as much as we used to. And of course, with less people working, it means income taxes receipts will be lower. So, and I made a statement last year prior to the reading of last year's budget and post last year's budget. I would not be surprised if I were to see an increase in income taxes. I don't know how that will go over, but I will not be surprised if I see that. And we have, last but not least, strained industrial relations, which makes us very unattractive to foreign investors. We have a labor market that is industrial relations that are strained. So, with all of that said, if we do not engage in this type of fiscal consolidation really fast, we will see some significant challenges. Another area that we've been deficient in is revenue collection. We have not been managing this process at all. And I remember that there was a talk of a revenue authority, and I said, well, let me do some digging. Let me see what this means. And countries that implemented a revenue authority saw no increases in their tax receipts. None. It came at a cost because it cost money to implement this thing. But there were no increases in tax receipts that were sustainable. The better option is to make some changes, which was proposed by the International Customs Organization, is to take certain elements of the Revenue Authority, just take a few elements from it, and implement that in the existing structure. We're not the only country with this type of structure, but I'm thinking about the Revenue Authority, but those that have done it, it didn't work. So I don't know what makes us feel that what we do will work. So we need to think about that seriously and improve the collection mechanism before we think about increasing. We can increase taxes all you want, but if you're not collecting it efficiently, then you're still missing the mark. So we need to first work on the collection mechanism, fix that, then we can talk about increasing taxes if need be, which is not necessarily a good thing at this point in time. So that is just my observations, my comments based on the factual data that is before me in all of these different reports and these agencies and economics as I know it. And this is from me studying economics, and I lived in Washington, D.C. for about 18 years. So I studied the Trinidad and Tobago economy from the outside looking in. And now I'm here, I'm able to study it on the inside. And I'm seeing same things, that, but now I'm seeing it manifesting itself in the worst form possible. And the lower income individuals are being adversely affected, which is one of the challenges that I have in